The first time my ribs burned like fire under the skin. I pressed my palm against them and lied. "I'm fine," I told James, my husband, and my mother on the phone. I told my students waiting for their piano lesson. It was easier to repeat those 2 words than admit I had no language for what was happening inside me. Words lodged in my throat, but my body spoke in needles and heat. I tried to outwalk the pain. The fog over London clung to my hair as I counted lampposts. 5 more, and I can turn back. 10 more, and I'm strong. But strength had nothing to do with miles. By the time I reached the corner shop, my jaw trembled, and my shoulders throbbed as though I had been clenching them for years. Doctors gave me leaflets. Friends offered ginger tea. A specialist finally whispered the word as though it could bruise me. Fibromyalgia. "My nerves amplify everything," he said. I nodded. Everything. That's exactly how it felt. Not just pain. The sound of cutlery, the memory of a broken conversation, a door shutting 2 streets away. At night, I stared at the crack in our bedroom ceiling. I remembered the things I had swallowed. My father's rejections, the miscarriage James and I never told anyone about, the fights that ended with "forget it," though I meant, "please don't forget me." If a body is a house, mine was an attic stacked with boxes too heavy to move. When the house groaned, I finally understood. Pain was a language. It spelled out the words I never said. That night, I whispered a clumsy prayer. "God, I don't know how to hold this." The curtain stirred in a breeze. My chest loosened slightly, like a door unlatched. My name is Claire Thompson. I'm 39 years old, a music teacher in South London, and a woman who learned to smile even when my insides screamed. My days once moved like scales: practice, repetition, tidy phrases. But fibromyalgia does not play by tidy rules. It seeped into every corner of my life, swelling doors, jamming hinges. The diagnosis wasn't thunder, it was fog. It blurred every line between health and illness, hope and despair. James tried to help. He carried shopping bags when my wrists gave up, swapped detergents when scents burned my skin. He kissed my forehead gently, but I still winced. Love couldn't erase the invisible bruises. And still, I swallowed the truth. I told him I was fine. I told my students I was fine. I even told myself. But the body cannot be lied to forever. Every Sunday, I slipped into the back pew of our Anglican church. Sunlight poured through stained glass, painting the floor in fractured colors. I mouthed hymns when singing hurt. The vicar once quoted softly, "Be still and know." I wanted to. I wanted stillness to be rescue, not captivity. So I prayed small words, "Help me." The answer was not lightning. It was Sarah, my neighbor, leaving a candle on my step. It was my mother humming hymns while shelling peas. It was courage to whisper the truth once, then again. Before we begin, if this story touches you, please subscribe, like, and comment so others may find it. Share with me which part speaks to you most, and tell me your city and country. Your words may be the comfort someone else needs tonight. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I woke to the sound of James making coffee downstairs, the familiar rhythm of spoon against mug, a small comfort before the day began. But when I tried to sit up, my body refused. Not dramatically. There was no sharp cry of pain, no theatrical collapse. Just a quiet rebellion, as if my muscles had signed a contract overnight that I wasn't privy to. I lay there for 10 minutes, maybe 15, staring at the water stain on our ceiling that looked like a butterfly with broken wings. James called up the stairs. "Claire, coffee's getting cold." His voice carried the cheerful impatience of someone who had never had to negotiate with his own body to move. I envied him that innocence. When I finally made it to the kitchen, James was already grabbing his coat. "You look tired," he said, kissing my cheek. I forced a smile. Just a rough night. It wasn't entirely a lie, I had slept badly. But it wasn't the whole truth either. The whole truth was that I felt like I was dissolving from the inside out, cell by cell. At the piano studio, 8-year-old Emma bounced onto the bench, ready for her lesson. Her fingers danced across the keys with the kind of careless joy I once knew. But when I tried to demonstrate a passage, my hands cramped. The melody collapsed into discord. "Are you okay, Miss Thompson?" Emma asked, her wide eyes suddenly worried. "Of course, sweetheart," I lied smoothly. "Let's try that again." That afternoon, I canceled 3 more lessons. I told parents their children were making such good progress we could skip a week. I told myself I just needed rest. But rest felt impossible when my body hummed with an electricity I couldn't switch off. Every nerve seemed to be shouting at once, a cacophony I couldn't escape. I called my mother. "Mom, do you ever feel like your body is speaking a language you don't understand?" She laughed, but not unkindly. "Oh, Claire, you sound like me when I hit menopause. Are you eating enough iron? Getting your vitamins?" I murmured agreement and hung up, more isolated than before. That evening, James found me sitting on the bathroom floor, fully dressed, staring at the tiles. "What's wrong?" he asked, crouching beside me. I wanted to tell him about the fire under my skin, about how the sound of the neighbor's television felt like needles in my skull, about how I felt like a stranger in my own body. Instead, I said, "I think I'm getting sick." He helped me to bed, tucking the covers around me like I was a child. "You'll feel better tomorrow," he whispered. I nodded, but I already knew better wasn't coming. Not tomorrow, not next week. Something fundamental had shifted, and I was falling through the cracks of my old life. As James slept beside me, I pressed my hand to my chest and felt my heart beating too fast, too loud. I thought about the butterfly stain on our ceiling, how beautiful things could come from damage. Maybe this breaking was leading somewhere I couldn't see yet. Maybe there was a reason I couldn't understand yet. But that night, in the dark with pain crawling up my spine like ivy, I felt nothing but afraid. 3 weeks of appointments blurred together like watercolors in rain. Dr. Martinez ordered blood tests. Dr. Singh suggested stress management. Dr. Patel recommended a neurologist who looked at me like I was a puzzle with missing pieces. Each doctor handed me their fragment of possibility: vitamin deficiency, anxiety disorder, chronic fatigue syndrome. None of them said the word that would eventually define my days. The waiting rooms became my second home. I memorized the magazines, learned which chairs hurt less, discovered that morning appointments left me less fragile than afternoon ones. I watched other patients with the desperate attention of someone trying to read her future in their faces. The woman with the walking stick who smiled too brightly, the man who moved like his bones were made of glass. James started coming with me to appointments. He took notes in his neat handwriting while I tried to explain symptoms that sounded impossible even to me. "The pain moves," I told Dr. Chen. "Yesterday it was my shoulders, today it's my hips, and sometimes everything just amplifies, like someone turned up the volume on my entire body." James squeezed my hand. I could feel his worry through his fingers. At home, I became a detective of my own body. I kept a pain diary, rating each day from 1 to 10. I researched symptoms until my eyes burned from screen light. I joined online forums where strangers shared their stories of invisible illness. "You sound like you might have fibromyalgia," wrote a woman named Susan from Manchester. The word made my stomach drop. I'd heard it whispered in waiting rooms, seen it on pamphlets I'd quickly passed by. The piano studio became my refuge and my torment. Music had always been my language, but now my hands betrayed me. During little Oliver's lesson, my fingers seized mid-scale. I pretended it was intentional, turning the mistake into a teaching moment about rhythm. But I saw the question in his mother's eyes when she picked him up. "Is everything all right with Miss Thompson?" she asked my assistant quietly. The whispers had started. Sleep became a stranger. I'd lie awake cataloging sensations. The burn in my ribs, the ache in my jaw, the way my scalp felt tender against the pillow. James would find me at 3 a.m., sitting by the window, and he'd ask what I was thinking about. How could I explain that I was listening to my body like it was speaking in code? That I was trying to decode what it was trying to tell me? My mother visited on a rainy Thursday. She took one look at me and began reorganizing my kitchen with the determined efficiency of someone who needed a problem she could fix. "You're not eating enough," she declared, filling my freezer with homemade soups. "And you need to stop reading those medical websites. They'll convince you you're dying of everything." But I wasn't convinced I was dying. I was convinced I was disappearing. Each day, another small piece of who I used to be slipped away. The Claire who could teach 6 lessons in a row, who could walk for miles through Hyde Park, who could make love to her husband without wincing, she was fading like an old photograph. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday that felt like any other. Dr. Williams, the rheumatologist, pressed 18 specific points on my body. I gasped at 11 of them. "Fibromyalgia," she said simply, as if she was telling me the weather. She handed me a pamphlet with a drawing of a woman outlined in red dots. "Your nervous system has become hypersensitive. It's amplifying normal sensations into pain." In the parking garage afterward, James and I sat in silence. Finally, he said, "At least now we know." But knowing felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. I had a name for what was wrong with me, but no map for where to go from here. 3 weeks of appointments blurred together like watercolors in rain. Dr. Martinez ordered blood tests. Dr. Singh suggested stress management. Dr. Patel recommended a neurologist who looked at me like I was a puzzle with missing pieces. Each doctor handed me their fragment of possibility: vitamin deficiency, anxiety disorder, chronic fatigue syndrome. None of them said the word that would eventually define my days. The waiting rooms became my second home. I memorized the magazines, learned which chairs hurt less, discovered that morning appointments left me less fragile than afternoon ones. I watched other patients with the desperate attention of someone trying to read her future in their faces. The woman with the walking stick who smiled too brightly, the man who moved like his bones were made of glass. James started coming with me to appointments. He took notes in his neat handwriting while I tried to explain symptoms that sounded impossible even to me. "The pain moves," I told Dr. Chen. "Yesterday it was my shoulders, today it's my hips, and sometimes everything just amplifies, like someone turned up the volume on my entire body." James squeezed my hand. I could feel his worry through his fingers. At home, I became a detective of my own body. I kept a pain diary, rating each day from 1 to 10. I researched symptoms until my eyes burned from screen light. I joined online forums where strangers shared their stories of invisible illness. "You sound like you might have fibromyalgia," wrote a woman named Susan from Manchester. The word made my stomach drop. I'd heard it whispered in waiting rooms, seen it on pamphlets I'd quickly passed by. The piano studio became my refuge and my torment. Music had always been my language, but now my hands betrayed me. During little Oliver's lesson, my fingers seized mid-scale. I pretended it was intentional, turning the mistake into a teaching moment about rhythm. But I saw the question in his mother's eyes when she picked him up. "Is everything all right with Miss Thompson?" she asked my assistant quietly. The whispers had started. Sleep became a stranger. I'd lie awake cataloging sensations. The burn in my ribs, the ache in my jaw, the way my scalp felt tender against the pillow. James would find me at 3 a.m., sitting by the window, and he'd ask what I was thinking about. How could I explain that I was listening to my body like it was speaking in code? That I was trying to decode what it was trying to tell me? My mother visited on a rainy Thursday. She took one look at me and began reorganizing my kitchen with the determined efficiency of someone who needed a problem she could fix. "You're not eating enough," she declared, filling my freezer with homemade soups. "And you need to stop reading those medical websites. They'll convince you you're dying of everything." But I wasn't convinced I was dying. I was convinced I was disappearing. Each day, another small piece of who I used to be slipped away. The Claire who could teach 6 lessons in a row, who could walk for miles through Hyde Park, who could make love to her husband without wincing. She was fading like an old photograph. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday that felt like any other. Dr. Williams, the rheumatologist, pressed 18 specific points on my body. I gasped at 11 of them. "Fibromyalgia," she said simply, as if she was telling me the weather. She handed me a pamphlet with a drawing of a woman outlined in red dots. "Your nervous system has become hypersensitive. It's amplifying normal sensations into pain." In the parking garage afterward, James and I sat in silence. Finally, he said, "At least now we know." But knowing felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. I had a name for what was wrong with me, but no map for where to go from here. The morning I stopped pretending I was fine started with James leaving for a conference in Edinburgh. "Are you sure you'll be okay?" he asked for the 3rd time, his suitcase by the door, his face creased with worry I'd trained him to hide. I kissed his cheek and lied with the fluency of practice. Of course. I might even enjoy the peace and quiet. But as his taxi pulled away, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like abandonment. 3 days alone stretched ahead of me like a sentence I had to serve. I'd canceled all my lessons, telling parents I had a family emergency. It wasn't entirely false. My body felt like an emergency I couldn't escape from. I made tea and forgot to drink it. I started a dozen activities and finished none. By noon, I was back in bed, staring at that ceiling stain that looked more like a dying bird than a butterfly. That's when the memories came flooding back, uninvited and unavoidable. The miscarriage we'd never spoken of, 3 years ago now. I'd been 12 weeks along, just beginning to believe in the small life growing inside me. We'd started buying baby books, had a list of names tucked in my jewelry box. When the bleeding started, James held me on the bathroom floor while I sobbed. But afterward, we'd boxed up the pain with the unused pregnancy tests and carried on as if nothing had happened. Now, lying in our empty house, I understood that grief doesn't disappear just because you don't speak its name. It settles in your bones, becomes part of your cellular structure. The baby we'd lost, the father I'd spent my childhood trying to please, the dreams I'd swallowed to keep peace. They all lived in my body now, translated into the language of pain. I called my father without knowing why. We'd spoken twice since Christmas, careful conversations about weather and work. But sitting there alone, I needed to hear his voice, even if it came with the familiar sting of his disapproval. "Claire, you sound terrible. Are you sick?" I started to give him the usual reassurances, but something in me broke open. "Dad, I need to tell you something." The words poured out of me like water from a broken dam. I told him about the fibromyalgia, about the way my body had become a stranger to me, about how scared I was that this was who I'd be forever. I waited for his response, for the uncomfortable clearing of throat that usually preceded his advice about pulling myself together. Instead, he was quiet for a long time. "I'm sorry, Claire," he finally said, and his voice sounded older than I remembered. "I'm sorry I never taught you it was okay to not be fine." After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen and cried until my ribs ached from the force of it. But it was different from the desperate weeping of the past months. This felt like release, like finally setting down a weight I'd been carrying since childhood. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my feelings to avoid conflict, all the ways I'd made myself smaller to fit into other people's expectations. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I sat at the piano, Not to teach or practice, but just to play. My fingers found Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece I'd loved since I was Emma's age. The melody was simple but heartbreaking, full of spaces between notes that somehow said more than the notes themselves. I played through the pain in my hands, through the burning in my shoulders, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself. The phone rang while I was playing. It was Sarah, my neighbor, whose kitchen window faced mine. "I heard you playing," she said simply. "It's beautiful. Are you all right?" I looked across the narrow gap between our houses and saw her silhouette in her window, a cup of tea in her hands. "I don't think I am," I said, and saying it out loud felt like the most honest thing I'd said in months. She appeared at my door 10 minutes later with a homemade apple cake and the kind of smile that doesn't try to fix anything. We sat at my kitchen table while I told her about the fibromyalgia, about the way I'd been drowning in my own silence. I kept thinking if I could just get better, everything would go back to normal, I said. But I think normal is gone. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, Sarah said gently. Maybe normal wasn't working for you. She was right. The old normal had involved a lot of pretending, a lot of swallowing feelings and needs and truths that had eventually found another way to speak. My body had become the voice I'd never learned to use. That night I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because the pain was gone, it never left completely, but because I'd finally stopped fighting it. I'd stopped trying to be the Claire I used to be, and started wondering who I might become instead. In the morning, I would call James and tell him the truth about how I was really doing. I would start the long work of learning to listen to my body instead of silencing it. But first, I needed to learn how to pray again. James came home from Edinburgh to find me sitting at the kitchen table with 3 books open in front of me. A fibromyalgia management guide, a book about grief and the body, and my old copy of Jesus Calling that I'd pulled from the back of a drawer. "You look different," he said, setting down his suitcase. I felt different too, like someone had opened windows in rooms that had been closed for too long. "I've been thinking," I said as he joined me at the table, "about the baby." His hand froze halfway to his coffee cup. We'd made an unspoken pact never to mention the miscarriage, as if silence could protect us from the reality of our loss. But I was done with silence. I think I've been carrying that grief in my body all this time, and Dad's disappointment, and all the words I never said. James reached across the table and took my hand. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I've been thinking about the baby too," he whispered. "I dream about her sometimes. I think it was a girl." We sat there holding hands and crying for the daughter we'd never named, the future we'd never had, the grief we'd buried so deep it had become part of our cellular structure. That Sunday, I walked back into St. Mary's Anglican Church for the first time in 3 months. The wooden pews still hurt my back, but I brought a cushion and sat in the 3rd row instead of hiding in the back. When we sang "Be Thou My Vision," I opened my mouth and let my imperfect voice join the chorus. It felt like coming home to myself. After the service, Pastor David approached me with concern in his eyes. "Claire, I've missed you. How are you managing?" I could have given him my old answer, fine, just fine. Instead, I told him about the fibromyalgia, about the way pain had become my teacher. "I think God speaks through our bodies too," I said. "Mine was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear." He nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes our deepest healing comes through our deepest wounds, like Christ's scars. They weren't erased by resurrection. They were transformed into something holy. His words stayed with me as I walked home through the London drizzle, my body aching but my heart somehow lighter. I started attending a chronic illness support group at the church. 8 of us gathered every Tuesday evening in the parish hall, sharing our stories over tea and biscuits. There was Margaret with her rheumatoid arthritis, Tom with his chronic fatigue, and Susan, the woman from the online forum who'd first mentioned fibromyalgia to me. We didn't try to fix each other. We just listened. With my students, I began to be honest about my limitations. Some days I'm not feeling well, I told Emma's mother when I had to shorten a lesson. But the beautiful thing about music is that it can be gentle when we need it to be. I started incorporating more seated work, more listening exercises, more discussions about how music could be healing. My teaching became deeper, more intentional. The real breakthrough came on a Thursday in December. I was having what I'd learned to call a high pain day. Everything hurt, from my scalp to my toes. But little Oliver had been looking forward to his lesson all week. His mother had called to say he'd been practicing his Christmas piece every day. I almost canceled, but something stopped me. When Oliver played Silent Night with his careful 7-year-old fingers, tears ran down my face. The music was imperfect, full of hesitations and missed notes. But it was also full of joy, of effort, of a child's pure love for something beautiful. "That was wonderful, Oliver," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Music doesn't have to be perfect to be holy. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in years. I wrote about pain and healing, about the way suffering can either close us down or crack us open. I wrote about the baby we'd lost and how grief had become part of my body's wisdom. I wrote about learning to listen to myself with the same compassion I'd show a frightened student. James found me writing and sat down beside me. "What are you working on?" he asked. "A letter," I said. "To the person I used to be. I'm thanking her for getting me this far, and I'm telling her it's okay to rest now." He kissed my temple, and for the first time in months, his touch didn't cause pain. It felt like benediction. Christmas Eve service that year was different from any I'd experienced. When we lit candles for the Christ child, I lit one for our lost daughter too. When the choir sang about peace on earth, I felt it settle into my bones alongside the pain, not erasing it, but transforming it into something I could live with. During communion, I knelt carefully and whispered, "Thank you for making me real." The fibromyalgia didn't disappear. It probably never would completely. But it had taught me to be gentle with myself, to listen to my body's wisdom, to speak my truth even when my voice shook. Most importantly, it had taught me that healing doesn't always mean returning to who you were. Sometimes it means becoming who you were always meant to be. Walking home from church that night, James's arm warm around my shoulders, I felt the ground solid beneath my feet. The pain was still there, but so was I. All of me, finally. Broken and beautiful, scarred and sacred, learning that sometimes our deepest wounds become the places where light gets in. 6 months later, I'm writing this from my music studio, where a sign now hangs beside the piano. Music is medicine for the soul. My students have taught me that healing happens in the spaces between notes, in the pauses where we remember to breathe, in the courage to play imperfectly, but with love. The fibromyalgia is still part of my daily reality. Some mornings I wake up feeling like I've been run over by a truck, but I've learned to read my body like a musical score, to respect its rhythms and rest in its silences. I've discovered that strength isn't about pushing through pain. It's about learning to dance with it, to find the melody hidden in the chaos. Most importantly, I've learned that our scars tell the story of our survival. They're not marks of weakness, but evidence of our resilience. The crack in my bedroom ceiling still looks like a butterfly to me, but now I see it as it was always meant to be seen. Not broken wings, but wings spread wide, ready to carry me wherever I need to go. And in that flight, I've found not just healing, but grace. Thank you for listening to Claire's story. If it touched you, please share it with someone who might need to know they're not alone in their pain. Healing happens when we stop hiding and start making room for each other's struggles. May you find your own butterfly wings in whatever cracks life has given you.